Welcome to this episode of the story. Have you subscribed yet? Chapter 87. The struggle for the eye of the spiritual abyss and the emergence of a turning point. The leader of the spiritual equilibrators pounced towards the eye of the spiritual abyss like a hungry tiger. Alarmed, Sumu instinctively used the reverse, time-space interception, instantly constructing a distorted space-time barrier in the path of the leader of the spiritual equilibrators. Caught off guard, the leader of the spiritual equilibrators slammed into the barrier, and the powerful shock force bounced him back. Humph, do you think you can stop me? The leader of the spiritual equilibrators steadied himself, a flash of annoyance in his eyes. He waved his hand, and the spiritual equilibrators and mysterious assassins behind him surged towards Sumu and the others like a tide. The cultivators of Linksea Town showed no fear. They unleashed their spiritual power moves to meet the enemy, and a fierce melee broke out in this underground cave. Sumu knew that the eye of the spiritual abyss must never fall into the enemy's hands. While fending off the attacks, he kept a close eye on the movement of the eye of the spiritual abyss. The spiritual equilibrators were powerful and coordinated well. They used various powerful spiritual power spells. For a moment, lights interlaced and spiritual power filled the cave. The mysterious assassins, with their ghost-like figures, looked for opportunities to launch sneak attacks in the chaos, trying to break through the defense line of the people in Linksea Town. A cultivator from Linksea Town, while resisting the assassin's attack, accidentally exposed a flaw and was scratched on the arm by the assassin's blade. Seeing this, Sumu quickly used the reverse time-healing light. A soft light containing reverse time spiritual power enveloped the injured cultivator, and the wound healed at a visible speed. Everyone, hold steady. Don't break the formation, Sumo shouted loudly. At the same time, he used the reverse time spiritual blade storm, and countless spiritual power blades carrying reverse time power swept towards the enemy. Caught off guard by this sudden attack, many of the enemies were injured and retreated. However, taking advantage of the moment when Sumo was using the move, the leader of the spiritual equilibrators rushed towards the eye of the spiritual abyss again. Sumo thought something was wrong. He quickly used the reverse time teleportation and instantly appeared in front of the leader of the spiritual equilibrators, using the reverse time spiritual space fist to punch at the leader of the spiritual equilibrators. A hint of disdain flashed in the eyes of the leader of the spiritual equilibrators. He circulated his spiritual power, condensed a spiritual power shield, and tried to resist Sumue's attack. Boom! Sumu's fist collided with the spiritual power shield, bursting out on earth, shattering Zhuxiang. Cracks appeared on the spiritual power shield under the powerful impact, and the leader of the spiritual equilibrators felt his arm go numb and was forced to retreat again and again. But he quickly steadied himself and confronted Sumo. "Kid, you do have some skills, but I'm determined to get the eye of the spiritual abyss today," the leader of the spiritual equilibrators said through gritted teeth. Just as the two sides were in a stalemate, Sumu suddenly noticed an abnormal fluctuation in the spiritual power around the eye of the spiritual abyss. The originally stable light began to flicker, and the surrounding ruins became blurred. An idea flashed in Sumu's mind. He realized that the eye of the spiritual abyss might undergo unpredictable changes due to this intense struggle. "Everyone, be careful. Is something wrong with the eye of the spiritual abyss?" Sumu loudly reminded everyone. However, the leader of the spiritual equilibrators thought this was a trick by Sumu. Taking advantage of the moment when Sumu was distracted, he launched an attack again. This time, he used the unique skill of the spiritual equilibrators, the Spirit Fantasy Annihilation Curse. A black spiritual power beam shot towards Sumu, and the space seemed to be torn apart where it passed. Sumu felt the powerful might of this move. He quickly circulated the reverse time spiritual power, the spiritual spring spiritual power, and the space spiritual power, and used an enhanced version of the reverse time spiritual space guardian barrier. The barrier glowed with multicolored light, integrating the power of the three types of spiritual powers, and collided with the black spiritual power beam.
For a moment, the light was extremely bright, and the impact of the spiritual power shattered the ground around, and cracks appeared on the walls of the cave. In the intense spiritual power confrontation, the spiritual power fluctuations around the eye of the spiritual abyss became more and more intense. Suddenly, a powerful spiritual power shock wave spread out in all directions centered on the eye of the spiritual abyss. Everyone was hit by this shockwave and fell to the ground. Sumo, enduring the pain in his body, looked up and saw the eye of the spiritual abyss slowly rising into the air. The light became so dazzling that it was impossible to look directly at. In the light, an illusory figure gradually emerged. The figure looked like an ancient spiritual being, with deep and mysterious eyes overlooking everyone. You people, in order to fight for the eye of the spiritual abyss, spare no effort to start a war. But you don't know that the eye of the spiritual abyss is not something to be fought for casually. The voice of the illusory figure echoed in the cave, as loud as a great bell. The leader of the spiritual equilibrators struggled to stand up and said, "Whoever you are, we must get the eye of the spiritual abyss. It can help us achieve our great plan," the illusory figure sneered. "Great plan? You're just pawns being used by the dark forces." The eye of the spiritual abyss is the key to maintaining the spiritual power balance of the spirit fantasy realm. If it is used by those with evil intentions, the spirit fantasy realm will surely be plunged into eternal damnation. Sumu also stood up and said to the illusory figure, "Senior, we came to find the eye of the spiritual abyss to stop the conspiracy of the mysterious force. I hope you can help us." The illusory figure looked at Sumo, a flash of approval in his eyes. "You possess the reverse, time spiritual power, which is quite unexpected. From you, I sense a breath of justice." Just then, the leader of the spiritual equilibrators suddenly launched an attack on the illusory figure. He thought the illusory figure was an obstacle to their seizure of the eye of the spiritual abyss and must be eliminated. "Humph, stop talking nonsense. Hand over the eye of the spiritual abyss." The leader of the spiritual equilibrators unleashed his full power attack, and a golden spiritual power column blasted towards the illusory figure. The illusory figure gently waved his hand, and the spiritual power column instantly dissipated. "Ignorant fool, how dare you be so presumptuous in front of me?" The voice of the illusory figure was full of dignity. He waved his big hand, and a powerful spiritual power restraint tightly trapped the leader of the spiritual equilibrators. The leader of the spiritual equilibrators struggled desperately, but couldn't break free. Seeing this, the other spiritual equilibrators and mysterious assassins launched attacks on the illusory figure one after another. However, their attacks were like a mantis trying to shake a tree in front of the illusory figure and were easily diffused. The illusory figure looked at everyone and said, "You people blinded by darkness, if you don't turn back, you will surely reap what you sow." Taking this opportunity, Sumo said to the cultivators of Linksea Town, "Everyone, let's help, and take this opportunity to subdue these enemies. We can't let them disrupt the peace of the spirit fantasy realm anymore." Everyone nodded, and together with the illusory figure counter, attacked the spiritual equilibrators and mysterious assassins. With the powerful power of the illusory figure and the concerted efforts of Sumu and the others, the enemies gradually fell into a difficult situation. Realizing that the situation was not good, the mysterious assassins wanted to escape. But how could the illusory figure let them succeed? He used the spirit fantasy space blockade to seal off the entire space of the cave, leaving the assassins with no way to escape. Although the spiritual equilibrators resisted desperately under the combined attacks of the illusory figure and Sumu and the others, they gradually couldn't hold on. Looking at the gradually losing situation, the leader of the spiritual equilibrators was filled with unwillingness. He suddenly crazily circulated his spiritual power, trying to break through the spiritual power restraint of the illusory figure. "I'm not willing. The eye of the spiritual abyss is mine." The spiritual power of the leader of the spiritual equilibrators surged wildly. His body began to expand, and an evil aura emanated from him. Sumo noticed the abnormality of the leader of the spiritual equilibrators. He realized that the leader of the spiritual equilibrators might be using some forbidden spell. "Everyone, be careful, he's going to fight to the death." Sumo loudly reminded everyone. Sure enough, the leader of the spiritual equilibrators used the forbidden spell, the spirit destroying heaven, annihilating curse. A powerful destructive force erupted centered on him and swept towards everyone. The face of the illusory figure changed slightly. He quickly used the spirit fantasy guardian barrier to protect Sumu and the others. The destructive force hit the barrier, bursting out a violent vibration. The barrier shook precariously under the powerful impact, and the illusory figure tried his best to maintain the stability of the barrier. Knowing that he couldn't just wait, Sumu circulated the reverse, time spiritual power, the spiritual, spring spiritual power, and the space spiritual power, and used the reverse, time spiritual, space purifying light. A purifying light that integrated the three types of spiritual powers shot towards the leader of the spiritual equilibrators, trying to purify the evil power on him. Under the illumination of the purifying light, the evil aura on the leader of the spiritual equilibrators gradually dissipated, and his crazy state was alleviated. However, at this moment, the eye of the spiritual abyss suddenly emitted a beam of light, covering the leader of the spiritual equilibrators. In the light, the expression of the leader of the spiritual equilibrators became extremely painful, and his body began to tremble. Everyone looked at this scene in surprise, not knowing why the eye of the spiritual abyss would act like this. The illusory figure looked at the leader of the spiritual equilibrators and said, "This is the punishment of the eye of the spiritual abyss on those with evil intentions. They can see through people's hearts. If anyone tries to use it to achieve evil purposes, they will surely be punished." As the light grew stronger, the body of the leader of the spiritual equilibrators gradually became transparent and finally disappeared into the air in a flash of light. Seeing the fate of their leader, the other spiritual equilibrators and mysterious assassins were filled with fear. They all put down their weapons and knelt down to beg for mercy. The illusory figure looked at everyone and said, "I'll spare you today, but you must swear that you will never do evil again. Otherwise, you will surely suffer more severe punishment." The spiritual equilibrators and mysterious assassins all swore. The illusory figure released the restraint on them and said, "Go. I hope you can keep your vows." The spiritual equilibrators and mysterious assassins, as if granted amnesty, fled the cave one after another. Sumu looked at the illusory figure and said, "Senior, thank you for your help. What should we do with the eye of the spiritual abyss next?" The illusory figure looked at Sumo and said, "The eye of the spiritual abyss needs someone with a just heart who can control it to guard it. I see that you possess multiple types of spiritual powers and are kind-hearted. Perhaps you are the right person. But the eye of the spiritual abyss contains huge power, and you need to be fully prepared before you can accept it." Sumo was overjoyed. But he also knew that the responsibility was heavy. "Senior, I'm willing to take on this responsibility, but how should I prepare?" The illusory figure said, "You need to seclude yourself for cultivation in this cave. Understand the power of the eye of the spiritual abyss, and at the same time, I will teach you some methods to control it. Only when you truly master the power of the eye of the spiritual abyss can you leave here with it and protect the peace of the spirit fantasy realm." Sumo nodded to show that he understood. He found a quiet corner in the cave, sat cross-legged, and began to seclude himself for cultivation. The cultivators of Lingxi town guarded outside the cave to prevent anyone from disturbing. Under the guidance of the illusory figure, can Sumo successfully master the power of the eye of the spiritual abyss? And how will he use the eye of the spiritual abyss to stop the conspiracy of the mysterious force and protect the peace of the spirit fantasy realm? Everything is full of unknowns. The story continues. More exciting content is coming up. Subscribe as soon as possible.